Hi everybody, I'm Mike McCrory, and this is Would You Make It? A fellow from Canada reached out to me and asked if I could make chessboards for each of his 4 grandchildren for Christmas. Christmas is only a few days away, so let's get started. I'm going to make 4 identical chessboards out of curly maple and walnut, so I'll cut all the pieces to length. I'll have just enough to make the 4 boards. Now I'll use the jointer to flatten one face of each board. And now I can run everything through the planer to get the other face flat and parallel to the first face that I jointed. Next, I'll joint one edge of each piece so that I can run it through the table saw to cut the strips for the squares. The chessboards are going to be 12 inches by 12 inches, so each strip will be 1.5 inches wide. The first piece is 1.531 inches, so I'll move the fence a little closer to the blade and try again. Now it's 1.497 inches, which is close enough. And with a bit of glue in between each strip, the board should end up to be pretty close to 12 inches wide. Each of these boards is long enough to make 16 squares, so I end up with a little less waste when cutting these. Now, I'm going to glue the squares onto a plywood substrate, so they don't have to be too thick. In fact, the thinner they are, the less the board will be affected by seasonal wood movement. Now I'll plane these down to remove the sawtooth marks and to get them all to the same thickness. Now I'll do the first glue up with alternating wood types to prepare for the 8 squares. I clamp the pieces together so that the glue doesn't ooze down between the strips. Because I've cut these pieces to be long enough to make both sides of the board, which I don't normally do, They're too long for my clamping fixture, so I've put two clamping fixtures side by side with a piece of plywood on top. I put a piece of parchment paper first so that this won't stick to the plywood. I use this block to line up the ends. Since all four boards are the same, I can glue up all four at the same time by stacking them on top of each other with a sheet of parchment paper between them. Now I'll line up the sides and then put a piece of plywood on top so that I can apply some vertical clamping pressure to keep them flat. And I'll clamp the sides and then add some vertical clamps around the edges. The next day, I can separate them and run them through the drum sander to remove the excess glue and to make sure they're perfectly flat. Now I will trim one end. Normally for a larger chessboard, I need to use my crosscut sled to do this, but these are only 12 inches wide, so I can use my miter gauge to push them through. Now, with the fence set to 1.5 inches, I can cut all the squares. That's 8 strips for each side of the 4 boards, so that's a total of 64 strips that I need to cut. Now, with my crosscut sled, I'll cut a piece of 1/2 inch plywood that I had on hand. After I make the first cut, I can use my fence to cut each piece to be 13 inches by 13 inches. That's large enough to leave a 1/2 inch overhang around all the edges that the frame will fit onto. Now I can glue up one side of the board. Oops! It's always hard to glue the edges without them falling over. These cauls are designed to fit over that 1/2 inch overhang, and because of these cauls, I can only glue one board at a time, so it takes a while to glue up all 4 boards. I put a block of wood in the center so that I can use a pipe clamp to put some pressure in the center. And then I clamp tightly around all the edges. After the glue has cured, I can flip it over and do the other side. So for the 4 chessboards, I had to do 8 glue-ups like this. After they're all glued up, I'll run each side through the drum sander. Now I can start working on the frame pieces. I had a lot of leftover pieces of walnut that I was able to use for this, so that's why I'm using this piece that's about 2 inches by 2.5 inches. Each piece of walnut is a little different, so I'll run them all through the planer to get them the same size. The chessboard will be 3/4 of an inch thick, so I have enough material here to resaw it into 2 pieces that are about 7/8 of an inch thick. That gives me enough excess to sand them down to be the same thickness as the chessboard. The overall size of the chessboard will be 15 inches by 15 inches, so I'm cutting the frame pieces to be 1.5 inches wide. And now I'll plane them one last time to get them to be the right thickness, just slightly thicker than each chessboard, so that I can sand them after the final glue up. Now I'll cut each frame piece to be the right length. I'm cutting them to be slightly longer than 15 inches so that I have a little excess when cutting the mitered corners. I have a dado blade on my table saw to cut a groove that will fit over the edge of the plywood on all sides of the chessboard. I'm cutting the groove a little more than 1/2 inch high, and then I'll flip the board around and cut again to ensure that the groove is centered. I'm going to cut a rabbet along the inside edge of each frame piece to have a brass border on the top side. I need the blade height set to the thickness of the brass. I normally use 1/8" brass, but they were out of stock, so I'm using pieces that are 5/32 of an inch square. Since my blade is only 1/8 of an inch thick, I will need to cut twice to remove that extra 32nd of an inch. That's why there's a little bit of material remaining along the edge when I make the first cut. Now I'll cut the brass into the correct length. I normally buy the brass in 72-inch lengths, so I'll cut the brass to fit around the playing field. Before gluing them onto the walnut, I like to sand them to remove the oxidation. And then I use Starbond CA glue because it's so quick to get everything glued in place. I spray accelerant onto the brass so I don't have to hold the brass in place for more than a few seconds. Now I need to trim the edges of the squares on the top and bottom side of each board so that the frame will fit snugly on both sides. Now I'll trim the frame pieces just a bit to remove any excess CA glue and any brass that needs to be trimmed off. Now I can cut the mitered corners of the 16 frame pieces, making each one 15 inches long. Now the chessboards are ready for the final glue up. The next day I can sand everything flat and get the frame and chessboard to be the same thickness. I had 100 grit sandpaper in the drum sander, so now I need to remove the lines caused by that coarse sandpaper. I started with 80 grit, and then I used 120 grit, then 180 grit, and then finished with 220 grit. Now I'll use a trim router with a 16th inch roundover bit to ease all of the edges on the top and bottom of each board. The only difference between each chessboard will be the birth date of each grandchild that I'll engrave onto the bottom using my laser. We use the month, day, year format in the US, but in Canada they use year, month, day. And for the finish, I'm spraying on a few coats of pre-catalyzed lacquer. So I gotta ask, would you make it?